Now, just a few words about Avram SKORKA. Now he is professor at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. He has been for almost 20 years director of the Seminario Rabbinico Latinoamericano in Buenos Aires. He also taught Talmud and rabbinic literature there, and SKORKA has been deeply committed to interreligious dialogue for his entire career, and he also worked together with Pope Francis, with whom he also wrote some books. His books are on religious dialogue, and as I said, with Pope Francis as well, and on the common reading of scripture, and also about Jewish law, and he also wrote some studies on Maimonides. So this leads us to listen to his talk now about the Rabbis of the Middle Ages and the Pharisees.
Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this very, very important meeting. Looking on you, my dear Joseph, because you was the one that invited me, and in your person I would like to thank all the people that prepared this very special moment. I am going to give you some information about some interesting places which are testimonying the view of the Middle Ages sages about the Pharisees. Sages, I mean rabbis. Middle Ages, I refer to the centuries 11, 12, 13. All of the sages that I'm going to quote are from Europe, or Rambam, that was born in Andalusia, Córdoba de Andalusia, and finishes life in Cairo, as you know. In order to know exactly how the rabbis worked in the Middle Ages, let me introduce you a few words, a few sentences about. For instance, Rambam. Rambam, he wrote a Summa Theologica. Really, there are people saying that Aquinas was inspired by the Summa Theologica. It's not Summa Theologica, in Hebrew it's Mishneh Torah or Yad Chazakah. It's a compendium of the whole Jewish law, halakha. Halakha is the main subject in Judaism, how to behave as a Jew. And in the introduction, he gives us the literature that the bibliography that he used: Talmud Bavli, Talmud Yerushalmi, all the midrashim, the halachic midrashim, and of course the Geonim. The Geonim were the people, the heads of the great academies in Babylonia, that they answered after the time of the Talmud, that they answered questions that they received from all the Jews that began spreading throughout the diasporas. So he had all this jurisprudential material, and he sat and performed an extraordinary compendium. This was in the 12th century. In the 11th century was another person named Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi, another rabbi, that he also organized a halachic compendium, but not in the extraordinary way that Maimonides, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, for you known as Maimonides, did. Okay, now after this short introduction, let us go to the point. In the last 200 years, much research has been conducted on a wide variety of texts in order to get a clearer understanding about the different groups that comprise Jewish society in the Judea of the late Second Temple and Mishnaic periods. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls provided a wealth of new information and opened many avenues for exploration of the subject. But the view of the different Jewish groups and the relationships among them continue to be a matter of controversy. Who were the Prushim? The Pharisees, in Hebrew Prushim. What the relationship was between them and the early Hasidim that appear in the rabbinic literature, and the Hasidim afterwards, and the early Chachamim, and the Chachamim. Chacham in Hebrew means the sage. For the Sephardic Jews, it's a synonym of rabbi. This is still unclear. I will present here the understanding through very few and short examples of Rashi, the great exegete of the Talmud in France, Germany. He studied in Worms in the 11th century. Ramban, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Nachman from Catalonia, Gerona, and Rambam, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, about these questions. Their views appear as incidental comments in their exegetical and halachic works. Unless some definitive new documents are unearthed in the future, the main tool that historians now have is the comparative analysis of the available sources. Since the same procedure was done by the sages in the past, because that I gave the introduction, it is interesting because, for instance, Rashi, when he wrote his explanations, his commentaries to the Talmud, he compared the different versions of the Talmud. It was the time before the press, so what he had in front of his eyes were manuscripts, and all those who studied the Talmud knows very, very well how Rashi corrects the text constantly. So they made a work like, in some sense, like professors today in the university, trying to have the real version and trying to understand who were the people, what are they talking about, how is the real exact explanation. Rashi introduces, for instance, Middle Ages French in order to bring explanations. Since the same procedure was done by the sages in the past, it is interesting to consider their works in order to see their evolving views on the subject. Even though relevant Greek writings, for instance, Philo, Josephus, and the fathers of the church, etc., were unknown to the medieval sages, their opinions are not only important for the historical record, but are also significant for understanding their halachic reasoning and how they made moral judgments by means of their interpretations of the Talmudic materials. Now, a few examples from the commentaries of Rashi to the Talmud. In Pesachim 26b, Rashi explains the Hebrew word tznuim, humble people, as a synonym of perushim, people who separate themselves from any possibility of transgression. In Nida 13b, he again uses perushim as a synonym of tzenuim, of a humble people, a humble person. In Nida 17a, he explains that Arvei Shabbatot, on the eves of Shabbat, and this is a main point, a very interesting point in Rashi, are times when both the Perushim and the Talmidei Chachamim. Talmidei Chachamim means the sages, the students of the sages are with their spouses. In this text, the distinction that Rashi makes between Perushim and the Talmudic sages is very notable. I don't know if he refers, when he said Perushim, really in this comment to Talmudic sages, but what is clear for me is that he makes a difference between Perushim, whatever it means, and Talmidei Chachamim, the way of the sages. He makes a distinction between the way of the humble people, the way that, or the tznuim, or people who have a special behavior, and he makes a difference with the sages. Because one of the questions that rose in this conference is, what is really the relationship between sages, Talmidei Chachamim, the sages of the Talmud, and the Perushim? And let us see how they understood that. Maimonides, in his exegesis to Leviticus 19:2, quotes and criticizes Rashi. Rashi was in the century 11 and Maimonides in 13th. Maimonides quotes and criticizes Rashi's explanation of the word Kedoshim, saints or holy ones. Rashi explains that Kedoshim means to be Perushim, separated from forbidden sexual activities, because any place you find a sexual prohibition in the Torah, says Rashi, you find the concept of kedusha. Yeah, in several places in Leviticus, when appears the sexual prohibitions appears kedoshim to you. Saint are you, or holy are you go to be. So he related this, and he explained that Kedoshim is the people, Perushim, separated from mis-sexual behavior. Ramban Maimonides says that Rashi does not quote verbatim the midrash that he quotes from Torat Kohanim, the source of Rashi's commentary, where appears Bi Kedushim, Bi Kedushim, Bi Perushim, in Sifra Kedoshim 1:1. In the same way appears in Leviticus 11:44 the expression you are to be holy, and is explained by the Midrash in Sifra Shemini 12:3 as in this word, I'm quoting, as I am holy, so you must also be holy. As I am Parush, it was quoted here already, so you must be Perushim. It does not mention, continues the idea of Maimonides, Perushim mina arayot. In the Midrash that Rashi quotes, says Maimonides, doesn't appear that you must be separated from the sexual misbehavior, a separation for sexual misbehavior, as Rashi says. The perishut, says Maimonides, must be understood as set apart from all excesses, because a person can fulfill all the precepts of the Torah and yet still be a wicked person. The Perushim named in the Talmud had this characteristic, says Maimonides, I'm quoting him. They act with modesty, humility, and purity, and not merely to fulfill the precepts of the Torah. According to Ramban's view, the Perushim were people who followed a special behavior and were not necessarily Chachamim, wise sages. Let us go now to Maimonides. The Talmud was the main focus of Jewish studies and investigation during the Middle Ages, and the sages who dealt with the subject established the basis for the further development of Jewish identity for the generations to come. Maimonides was the one who articulated the essence of Judaism in ways that have guided Jews up to the present. He lived in a time of controversies and tensions in which different conceptions of Judaism collided. Maimonides' halachic decisions prevailed over all others, and his opinion is still considered decisive today. His major halachic work, as I already told you, is Mishneh Torah Yad HaChazaka. In Hilchot Tumat Kohanim, in Hilchot Tumat Ochalin, 1612, of the Yad HaChazaka, we read, even though it is permitted to eat impure foods and to drink impure beverages, the earlier Hasidim used to eat the simple foods which are allowed to be eaten in pureness, and kept themselves away from all kinds of impurities throughout their lives. And they are called Perushim, Pharisees. This is an extraordinary point. Rambam is here defining what we have to understand with the word Pharisees, and I suppose that in the Talmud. And this gave an added sanctity and pious path to be separated and to be apart from the other simple people, not to touch them, neither to eat nor drink with them, for separation, perishut, leads to the purification of the body from wicked actions, and the purification of the body leads to sanctifying one's soul away from wicked character traits. And the holiness of the soul causes one to resemble the divine presence, as appears in Leviticus. And you shall make yourself holy, and you shall be holy, because I, God, who makes you holy, am holy. Since Maimonides wrote his book with an extraordinary degree of precision and care, from the above paragraph it can be concluded that in all the places where he refers to the earlier Hasidim, it is probable to learn about, you are historians, you know what the word Hasidim, the Mitnagdim in the Maccabees times, how important it was. And this is a second point to take in consideration, the link that he makes between earlier Hasidim and Perushim. It is possible to learn about the teachings and behavior of the Pharisees, but tracing his use of the expression Hasidim Harishonim in the Talmudic passages on which supposedly he based his affirmations, as in this case, we see that he did not make a careful distinction between Hasidim, the pious, and Hasidim Rishonim, the first pious. And in certain cases, from all that the cases that I am going to show you right now, he has ascribed some teachings to the Hasidim that are not found in the other known in the other known Talmudic versions. Did he consider that Hasidim and Hasidim Rishonim were synonymous? It seems so. In Ilchot Talmud Torah, after establishing that anyone who decided that he should involve himself to the Torah study without doing work and derives his livelihood from charity desecrates God's name, dishonors the Torah, extinguishes the light of faith, brings evil upon himself, and forfeits the life of the world to come, for it's forbidden to derive benefits from the words of the Torah in this world. And Rambam goes on to conclude that it is a great virtue for a person to derive his livelihood from his own efforts. This attribute was possessed by the earlier Hasidim. In this manner, one will merit all types of honor and benefit in his world and in the world to come, as appears in Psalms. If you eat the toil of your hands, you will be happy, and it will be good for you. You will be happy in this world, it will be good for you in the world to come, which is entirely good. In Ilchot Talmud Torah, Maimonides also, Maimonides also affirms this was the practice of the earlier Hasidim. They would hear shameful insults and not answer. Oh, now we are learning the way of thinking and the way of behaving of the Hasidim. Who were the Hasidim in accordance to the view of Maimonides? How is he defining the word Hasidim? And we know the link between earlier Hasidim and Perushim. Even more, they would pardon and forgive the person who insulted them. The great sages would take pride in their amiable deeds, saying that they never issued a ban of ostracism or excommunication to protect their own honor. This is the path of the sages, which is worthy of being followed. In Hilchot Tefillah Unesiat Kapayim appears, how do enter a proper frame of mind for the recitation of the prayers. One should clear his mind from all thoughts and imagine himself as standing before the divine presence. Therefore, one must sit a short while before praying in order to direct these sentiments and thoughts, and then pray with pleasing supplication. One should not pray as one carrying a burden who throws it off and walks away. Therefore, one must sit a short while after praying and then withdraw. This is the earlier Hasidim. This is a very famous quotation from Masechet Brachot. Would wait an honor before praying and an hour after praying, and extend their prayers for an hour. In many of these quotations, I would like to stress this point. We look after in the Talmud and we find the word early Hasidim, but in other places, no. Rambam understood that, and he introduced that, ascribing the concept to the Prushim, or earlier Hasidim. In Ilchot Ta'aniyot 5:9, after explaining the characteristics of the meals to eat on the eve of Tisha B'Av, the day of mourning for the Babylonian and Roman destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, Maimonides added the following. This is the rite observed by all the people who cannot endure more, but the rite observed by the earlier Hasidim. And now you have the whole image that Maimonides presents us, who were the Prushim, and they were their way of thinking. A person would sit alone between the oven on the cooking range. Others would bring him dried bread and salt. He would dip it in water and drink a pitcher of water while worried, forlorn. Okay, we continue. You have that. You can follow that in the screen. It is very interesting to note the distinction made here by Maimonides between the extreme behavior of the earlier Hasidim, again, apparently synonymous with Perushim or Pharisees, which was to serve as a model for the milder practice of the sages. In Ilchot Hisurei Bia, for instance, appears one of the pious men of the earlier Hasidim, and the great sages prided himself, one of them, in that he never looked at his male organ. Another said with pride that he had never contemplated his wife's physical form, for their hearts would be diverted from such profligate matters to the words of truth which take hold of the hearts of the holy. In Ilchot Nezikei Mammon appears the earlier Hasidim would bury thorns and fragments of glass in their fields at least three hand breadths below the ground, so they would not be lifted up by a plow. Others would burn them in fire. So afterwards, Maimonides, we can continue stressing that Maimonides probably was inspired. This is a very interesting paragraph in Ilchot Shemitah veYovel, was inspired, and I afterwards I will give you the reasons why this is my idea, that Maimonides was inspired by the Pharisees, or by this image of the Pharisees, when he wrote the following. Why did the other way. Now, why did, one more, why did, oh no, excuse me. I didn't introduce this in the PowerPoint. So, excuse me. Why did the Leviim, the Levites, not receive a portion in the inheritance of Eretz Israel and in the spoils of the war like their brethren, because they were set aside to serve God and minister unto him and to instruct people at large in his just path and righteous judgments. It's stated in Deuteronomy, they will teach your judgments to Yaakov and your Torah to Israel. Therefore, they were set apart from the ways of the world. They do not wage war like the remainder of the Jewish people, nor do they receive an inheritance, nor do they self-aggrandize by means of their physical power. Instead, they are God's legion. As it stated, God has blessed his legion, and he provides for them, and as appears in Numbers, as stated in the book of Numbers, I am your portion and your inheritance. Not only the tribe of Levi, but any one of the inhabitants, and this is really a very interesting, very interesting point in Mishneh Torah. But any one of the inhabitants, not Jews, inhabitants of the world, whose spirit generously motivates him and he understands with his wisdom to set himself aside and stand before God to serve him and minister to him and to know God, proceeding justly as God made him, removing from his neck the yoke of the many reckonings which people seek. He is sanctified as holy of holies. God will be his portion and heritage forever and will provide what is sufficient for him in this world like. He provides for the priest and the Levites. And thus David declared about him, God is the lot of my portion, you are my cup, you support my lot. End of the quote. The above description of the holy person coincides with the explanation of the Mishnah Sotah 3:4, Leshon HaMatchil Eina Maspeket Lishtot, which describes, in his explanation to the Mishnah, describes the separation of the prishut that one made for himself, and refers also to the Chachamim, who separated themselves from the materialistic world. Here we are. We have the sensation that he is ascribing to the Chachamim also values of priesthood or attitudes of priesthood. And Hameiri, in the same way, Hameiri in the 13th century, comments something very interesting. Hameiri, Rabbeinu Menachem Hameiri, Perpignan. In Perpignan was his place. And the Perushim, I'm quoting him, and the Perushim were named Chachamim. This says Hameiri, for they are separated from the ways of the simple people and from the ambitious, from the world, and from the despicable customs. Those are the real Perushim, and I stress the word real. Okay, in 20 instances, Maimonides refers to halachot invoking their origins in the teachings of the early Chachamim. This indicated that he makes a distinction. Again, in Maimonides, he is very precise, but from time to time, for him, it was very difficult to make differences in a very clear word. And in the way, my feeling is that in the way that Hameiri distinguished Perushim, the different classes that were real Perushim and not real Perushim, the same sensation had Maimonides. And afterwards, I will quote a very famous quotation regarding the different Perushim, and not from Masechet Sotah, but from Avot Rabbi Natan. In 20 instances, Maimonides refer to halachot invoking their origins in the teachings of the earlier Chachamim. This indicated that he makes a distinction between early Chachamim and early Hasidim and earlier Chachamim. Okay, and now we have the different, I am not going to enter in all the details. I am quoting, let us give some examples, not all the examples. For instance, in Ilchot Yesodei Torah, it is a restriction to teach certain qualities of God only to individuals with a great capability of understanding, in accordance with the first Mishnah of Masechet Chagiga. And again, in Masechet Chagiga doesn't appear that early Chachamim said that. There are certain, from this halachot, from these laws, that in the Talmud appeared that the early Chachamim established that, and other that not. Okay, this so you can see a few examples. The 20 cases, the sources that from where Rambam took his sayings, the laws. Conclusion. A comparative analysis that not reveal a substantial difference between the halachic themes and the position that Rambam ascribes to Hasidim Rishonim, the first pious, and those he ascribes to the Chachamim Rishonim, the first wisest. Despite the tight similarities between Perushim and Chachamim that we find in Rashi and Rambam, together with the quotations from Rambam presented above, nevertheless, clearly they weren't identified as exactly coexistensive, rather they made a distinction between them. The medieval sages used the word Perushim in particular circumstances with regard to a pious Jew who fulfills the commandments in a very intense or zealous way. This, for instance, Sheilot Utshuvot Rashi, Siman 128, Tur Orach Chaim, Ilchot Tisha B'Av, and so on. As seen in a number of Talmudic passages, also Bava Batra 60b. Rabbi Dror Fixler in 1991 analyzed the expressions Chachamim, Hasidim, Rishonim in the Mishneh Torah of Rambam in an article published in Sinai and a journal of Torah and Jewish studies. He studied the different places where these expressions appear, but didn't consider Rambam's affirmation regarding the Perushim, which was our analytical starting point here. Fixler's conclusion was that the word Rishonim, the first, doesn't refer to a specific time, since Rambam uses the same term with regard to the traditions of the Tanaim as well as to the Amoraic teachings. He rather uses this term in order to present a halacha that was not accepted. Again, in accordance to this rabbi, his understood of Maimonides is Perushim were polarized people that work and behaved in an extreme way, in a polarized way, trying to maintain a very special and not common keeping of the Torah, which he quoted in order to broaden the knowledge of the student. I finished the phrase regarding the article of Fixler, that Rambam brought these ideas in order to broaden the knowledge of the students. Were people that used to behave in this way? This conclusion sustained the idea repeated here that the Perushim maintained a special way of behaving that was partially accepted by the Talmudic sages. It seems that Rambam's approach was to present the teachings of the Talmudic rabbis in a coherent way, going deep in their quintessence and putting aside the exact determination of their sectarian origin. It appears as Shaya Cohen pointed out, as he was quoted today, but I would like to quote him verbatim. The major goal of the Yavnian rabbis seems to have been not the expulsion of those with whom they disagreed, but the cessation of sectarianism and the creation of a society which tolerated, even encouraged, vigorous debate among members of the fold. The Mishnah is the first work of Jewish antiquity which ascribes conflicting legal opinions to named individuals who, in spite of their disagreements, belong to the same fraternity. End of the quote. An impressive, I finish. 3 minutes. An impressive example of this attitude is the inclusion of the teachings of Elisha ben Avuya in Avot. He apostated his Jewish condition, his Jewish beliefs, and also, but his teachings were included in Avot and Avot the Rabbi Natan. The union of different groups of the people after Yavne, as Cohen affirms, led by the sages that elaborated the teaching that afterwards were canonized in the Mishnah, made almost impossible to know the exact relationship between the teachings of the Perushim and those of the Chachamim. Moreover, in accordance to rabbinical sources, in Avot the Rabbi Natan, and this is for me a very important source, the Perushim were divided into 7 groups, making them impossible to know the differences among them through the rabbinical sources that we have in the present. And the great Shaul Lieberman, I was inspired by his teachings in one of his papers to write this phrase. The special dynamics and tensions between the rabbinic rational leaderships of the Chachamim and the charismatic mystical leadership of the Hasidim has been discussed by Mordechai Mordestein. In conclusion, that follows from this presentation is that despite the many cases in the Talmudic literature where the teachings of the Perushim were seemingly accepted by the Chachamim, there are not conclusive evidences that allow us to relate as one are the continuators of the others. Nevertheless, many of the teachings of the Perushim were adopted by the Chachamim, since they maintain the spiritual vision. That in contrast with that of the Sadducees and other sects, remained in many aspects the view and vision of the Jewish people through the generations. Thank you so much.